Actually, this is a talk that was given by a master gardener. Well, first of all, crepe myrtle. I'll probably mix up crepe myrtle and crepe myrtle all the time when I'm talking, but just bear with me on this. But crepe myrtle are quite a popular tree, shrub, whatever, in especially the South. The annual wholesale value of crepe myrtles sold in the United States almost doubled to now it's reached 67 million. Number of plants has gone from 2 to 5 million in that period of time as well. The common name, now here's something, you always wonder how to spell crepe myrtle. And so looking it up, there's different ways of saying it. Sometimes there's an E in there for the crepe myrtle, but most of the time you don't want that space in there. And then they go into telling you why, because it's not a true member of the myrtle family. It's actually in the Litheraceae family. So technically, I think this is the proper way to say it or spell it, but anybody, if you see an article or you write an article, it doesn't matter how you do it. The crepe myrtle originated in China. It was named this this Chinese name. It means 100 days of red, and that's about what we get out of it here in Hamilton County, Chattanooga. It's also called the monkey tree because the monkeys could not climb the smooth, slippery trunks. I don't know if that's true or not. And the tree was originally favored by the Tang dynasty back in 618 to 906. So this tree goes back quite a bit. The English brought it over to Great Britain, but it was too cold over there apparently. And so then when they brought it to the United States, and especially the South, that's where it really took over. When they brought it to Charleston, South Carolina, in the late 1700s, it was also introduced at Mount Vernon, George Washington's estate. So it probably caused quite a stir back then when that tree arrived. It was a very, and since then it's been widely planted and naturalized throughout the Gulf Coast states. And it used to be thought of as the Deep South tree, but over the years they've come to produce so many different cultivars, and now they're trying to introduce cold hardiness, which means a little bit better growth in places like Tennessee and maybe even Kentucky. The genus was named, that strange name was the Lagerstrom, was named after the Swedish merchant Magnus von Lagerstrom. He was director of the Swedish East India Company. And that's the name they've given it, Lagerstromia, but I don't think anybody's going to use that too much unless you're really looking for the proper name. And the indica on the end, the species epithet of the name, is sort of tells you that it might have had some origin in India. So, and then there's also another species found in Japan, and these two species, the one that's originated from India and the one in Japan, are used as hybrids to produce a lot of the excellent selections. This is the one that's typically seen or was seen years ago. It's got a mature height of 20, 30 feet high, and it spreads out. We had these for at least 20 years, I think, in our parking lot at the Ag Center. And every year they would be chopped straight off, all the way down. And over the years, and then when I arrived probably 16 years ago, I wrote letters to the county, at least our county folks that took care of those. And it took me a couple of years to make them stop doing it. But you can still see what you call the knuckles. I'll show you what the knuckles look like as we go along. Over the years, there's been many, many new crepe myrtle cultivars, and you can see the wide range of not only flower color, but look real close. They've darkened the foliage on a lot of these so that they can make those flowers just pop out. So that's, and also the sizes. There's everything from a bonsai plant to 30 feet tall crepe myrtle. There's another bunches and different groups. This is from Texas A&M, but different groups have concentrated on different aspects of crepe myrtle. So here's what we're going to talk about today, basically. And this was put together with the help of Elaine Barker, and most master gardeners today don't know her. She passed away from breast cancer, gosh, probably 11 years ago, I think, or 12 years ago. And she was outstanding master gardener. Her passion was taking care of trees. She was taking care of our Bonnie Oaks Arboretum. She'd be the one that when the county put up mulch piles around the trees, next day she'd go out and rake them out and make a nice 3-inch layer of the mulch. So I really appreciated her back then. And this is what it looks like. I think this is down near Erlanger Hospital, I want to guess. I see some familiar traffic lights and turns, but you see this widespread in Chattanooga. I just don't know. This is where we ought to hang our little signs. I don't know if it'd do any good, but this is very typical. You can go out right now because this is the time of year when it's done, and people just keep on doing it. So what is actually crepe murder? The term was coined to describe the practice of just chopping or topping off, almost like an amputation of the top growth of crepe myrtles. And it's self-inflicted too. It's something that the tree can survive, but if you watch the trees that's done to, you'll see that they start rotting where those cuts are made, because most of the cuts aren't selectively cut. They're more or less just chopped off halfway up. And here's the results of crepe murder. Basically, you end up with very knobby, sometimes we call them knuckles, just occur at the tip of the stub there. They're trying to thin it out. They're trying to get, in most cases, they're trying to get somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 6 or 7 stems that are coming out of the ground, but a lot of times they don't do the right thing. And this is what it looks like after it grows back out. It'll grow back out pretty quickly. Actually, it's determined by the genetics. If a tree is going to be 20 feet tall, if you cut it off when it's 15 and you cut it down to 5, it's going to want to go back up to 20 feet tall because it's built into its genetics. And the problem with cutting it that way is that now you've got all this stringy little tiny growth, and all that growth is going to get fatter and bigger. So you really have to come back in again and thin out the smaller ones. But people don't do that. They just chop it off, chop it again at the same height, which produces even more little wispy little branches. And so why does that occur? I don't know. We haven't been teaching that at UT forever, but a lot of the landscapers, I think I've asked them and they said, well, I learned it from my buddy or learned it from the crew. So there's a mistaken impression that it promotes abundant more flowering, which it doesn't. They've proven that at the University of Florida. Keep plants from outgrowing limited space. That's a little bit, there is a time and a place where you might want to free it from a house, and there's a way to do that too. I'll probably get around talking about how to steer it away from a place where it's been planted too close. And if you look around and see it, it seems like maybe everyone else seems to be doing it. So you look at your neighbors and they might say, I got mine done, now it's your turn. And the flowers, no, that isn't true. More abundant blooms, no. Plentiful blooms block the air and the sun. Stems become more succulent, attracting mites and aphids. Branches become long and willowy. That's what ends up with if you chop it too severely. If it outgrows the space, then you should be thinking about proper sizing. And maybe it's because there just aren't all the different sizes available at the nursery. You may have to really hunt for some of the different sizes and shapes, and then you have to read the labels to determine which one would fit in that certain space. And I really doubt if the landscape architects do that to any certain extent. They can be moved, but they have pretty good root systems established. So I don't know if I would really recommend transplanting a 10-year-old crepe myrtle. Everyone's doing it. You move into a neighborhood. If you're not familiar, you do it the way the guy down the street has done it. So that's kind of what you see in neighborhoods. Now here's where you can pick the right size so you don't get into that problem. There's dwarfs that are less than 5 feet or less than 4 feet after 5 years, semi-dwarf, intermediate. Then the trees like the Natchez tree can be 20 feet after 10 years. So try to pick the ones that are a little less, well, fit the ones that you know the size after about 10 years. The first year I was here, 16 years ago, we got a bunch of these. We got some dwarfs, all these different sizes, and we planted them at the entrance to Bonnie Oaks, just at the Ag Center. And they've grown now for 15 years, pretty good. And the dwarfs are still pretty small, and the semi-dwarfs are, there's a good variety of different ones. Here's a good example of a picture I found. The ones at the top that are named are 5 feet or under in height. Some of those are called Dynamite, Tuscarora, Catawba. I remember some of these Hoppy. There's an Indian series, Arapaho, Yuma. Down below, those can be over 20 feet. And there you see the Natchez, but then there's all those other ones that are some of the other Sioux, Powhatan, William Tuvey, and there's many, many more. So here's one that was chosen to be just a small. Maybe this is a small one. There's one that looks really dramatic. If you do it right, gosh, you can really make a sculpture out of a crepe myrtle. If you prune it right and do it right. We've done some of these. I think these are down at the Discovery Museum. I don't know if this is where it's at, but you see that just turns into a beautiful sculpture. And if you light it right, it can be dynamic. There's some more that enhance this, the look of the building. Basically, what they've done here is kind of limbed them up too, so that you could see for safety. You can walk around there and you could see someone lurking around the corner, but then it takes away from the sharp edges of the upper part of the building. So very, very nicely done right here. So there's different ways you can determine pruning within its own area. You could make a standard tree shape, a bush type, or maybe you'd like to do something with multi-stem, 3 cane, or something like that. Usually designers will say try to do an odd number, 3 or 5, but sometimes I go with what the tree has. So here's a tree form, and basically you can just train it. I wouldn't do it all in one go, but I would just over the years, maybe 1 year, use the same techniques as you do for pruning any other fruit tree or any other shade tree. Every year you don't take more than 1/3 of branches away. So in this case, they kind of just kept limiting it up. In this case, they had a purpose because cars or people, there's a bike trail right there, it looks like. So they wanted to maintain it, but they wanted to have the beauty of crepe myrtle. Or a shrub, that would work real well there. That would be much better than making a tree form in that case. And multi-stem, this is what you see most of the time in people's yards, where there's several stems. And this is very easily done. Most of the time the crepe myrtle is going to have multi-stems to begin with, and sometimes it starts to sucker. You can see, and I'll show some of those little starts next to the tree. So if you only have 2 trunks and you want 3, and you're going to get suckers coming out of the bottom, so you just take a couple away and just take an extra one and turn it into, and it'll catch up. It won't catch up right away, but over 3 to 5 years it'll catch up and kind of give you a 3 or 5, whatever number of stems. I wouldn't go too much over 7. I think 3 looks real good, and it gives those trunks space to spread out, especially as they get bigger and bigger. And these things can last for a long, long time, 30 years, 40 years on up. When to prune right now is probably why you see everybody pruning, because they produce on new growth. So the flower buds are forming. Right now I'm looking out my window and looking at my crepe myrtles, and they're above the house. They're way up to the 2nd story, and they're just full of seeds, the seed pods. There's no reason to get up there and shear off any of those seed pods. They'll just be pushed out by the new growth. So the general rule of any pruning, including crepe myrtles, if you have to, are take out the dead first, take out any diseased pieces. Also, if there's crossing branches, if there's rubbing, two limbs rubbing against each other, then, and especially if it's in the center of the clump there, then take out, decide which one should go and get rid of that one. So if there's any limbs pointing toward the ground and you want it more upright, then that makes sense. Take away all the suckers at the base. And if there's a real severe V crotch, then just you could cut it off and maybe kind of steer it away from them. In my case, I've got them probably 20 feet away from the house, but there are quite a few that arch in over my porch. And so every year I just look at the ones that are getting too close to the bottom of the porch, and I just take off a couple. I never chop it off down to nothing. I want it to arch away from the house. So here's a general rule. We teach this all the time and how to do it. A tree has, where the red part is there, you can see that there's a branch collar, which means it's a fat part. It's a fat part. You don't want to cut into that. You don't want to do like they have that one that goes straight down. The cut will be too big and it'll be hard to heal or callus over. So you want to just cut it off. A lot of times, if it's a dead branch, that's easy. Sometimes it's a big one. You do a little ABC cut. There you can see you cut it off as a stub, but then you don't want to leave a stub because then that'll lead to death or disease. So you want to do it where the C and D lines are right there. But you can see the AB lines. That gives you a chance. So you don't strip the bark away from the. And if you're, then once you go out to the tips, once you've got those major branches, and then you just want to go out to every branch. And if you use your hand pruners, that might be a way to go. Let's see, the number one is kind of the best one, especially if you're pruning. See that top bud there is pointing out. If you want to take that much definition into how to do it. You wouldn't want to cut it back to the one below that because maybe that one would be going in, and then next year you'd have to take that branch out because it was growing inside. You want to have more, I'm saying, prune them to the outside so that you have more airflow, more sunlight. They get more sunlight. It'll just look much better. Take out all these suckers, unless you want to keep one or two to fill in. Here they've got three good, pretty good trunks. A couple of them are crowded, but maybe you see something wrong, so you'd like to just use one of those. And pruning equipment, saws, loppers, hand pruners, all those can be useful. Once they get pretty big, as the ones I have here, it's pretty hard to use the hand clippers. So I have actually a pole saw that works really well, and a pole pruners that works pretty well to reach up there and just thin it out. Like I say, I've never thought about chopping them straight off, but I do take out a lot of branches from the inside. So if you're going to do a tree, here's sort of another rehash of pruning for a standard tree. You can just pick one straight cane, prune the remaining canes as the tree grows up and limbs out. I haven't seen this too much, but I think it could be very effective, especially if you need to walk around it. You wanted to mow underneath it. It'd be a pretty good looking tree that way. Some people would say you could, if you don't like, which most people don't like, Bradford pears, if you took a Natchez, a real bright white crepe myrtle, you could simulate a Bradford pear just by having a beautiful white variety cultivar and just limb it up into a tree. That would give you that white look if you're looking for it, especially late in the year. So here if you can look at all these cuts, they're basically just cutting off all the branches on the inside, and they're making it into a tree, so And keep in mind, boy, crepe myrtles are so resilient. You can't make a bad cut. You can just look at it and go, I want a tree, or I want to keep this branch. You can see that they're taking quite a bit off the center, but in their case, they're trying to get a tree, so they're not taking those out entirely. They're just taking off the side branches of those center, because they're trying to figure out which one is going to be their main trunk. Now, if you want a multi-stem plant, you'd select 3 or 5 strong canes, and make sure you pick the ones that at least they're healthy, of course, and then 6 inches apart as they go up. Form a shape of a vase, trim out the small branches, and then 1/3 up, or maybe up 1/3 up, you remove the lower lateral branches. You know, just about anything goes. Look at how beautiful that's going to be. And I would say take a few cuts, stand back, look again, and if you can't think of anything more, stop for the year, because you always have year 2 and 3 and 4, and it'll repair your mistakes every time. Keep in mind, every time you make a cut, there are going to be, when it starts growing again, there are going to be some stimulation of more little branches down below. And the other thing keep in mind is that as the tree gets bigger and bigger, and it gets pretty tight on the inside, just the shade of that inner part of the tree is going to cause several branches to die, just because they aren't getting enough sunlight. And if you want a compact shrub, yeah, here they show prune back all the stems if you really want to do it. Now, yeah, most of the time you aren't going to go this way, but you can do it. Now I talked about the seed pods. I would leave the seed pods on most of the time. If they're smaller trees or shrubs and you can reach them, it helps. Just don't get down into the new growing buds, and do it after they bloom. Actually, you know, when they start to bloom and you get a full show, you can even, the ones you can reach when there's reachable time, you can go out and take off the dead-headed ones. We call it deadheading, when you take off the ones that have flowered real good, and take them off again. Sometimes you can get another bloom. And here on this one, it says goldfinches eat the seed pods. I haven't really noticed. I've got a few slides on the benefits of crepe myrtles to wildlife, and it mentions goldfinches. So here's kind of the way new growth is on a crepe myrtle tree. Just too much growth. You're going to have to get up in there with what? You're going to have to get a pole saw to cut that out. It'll be another extra job. Here's our good friend John Netzel, who teaches pruning, and he's done several demonstrations. Here he's removing dead stubs and taking out some of those extra stems. We just don't need that many stems. But now that they're getting mature, he doesn't want to take them all the way back to 3 or 7. He's just taking out a couple out of the middle to give that tree a little bit more room for light and sunlight and air. So if you really got something that you think you need somebody like John or some of the other ISA arborists in town, then you might need that. But most people can do it themselves. It's not a huge, the trees aren't huge, and the tools aren't that hard to find. And so you can see he kind of opened it up right there. There's still these weren't taken care of very well for about 10 years probably, and so now we're just trying to come back and repair it. And you can prune off those bad stubs. Use a little handsaw to get rid of those stubs, and then make sure you can see where some of those dimples, it's in white right there, but you can see where the little belly buttons, outies. If you see an outie, that's a pretty good, you made a pretty good cut because it was pruned properly. Or sometimes if it's a little donut looking thing. But on crepe myrtles, they look just like that, bumps. And that means you cut it at the right spot, right at that collar, and the tree was able to callus over it. So here's how you repair. You look for strong growth and remove all the thin branches. The seed pods could be removed. You want to open up the crown. And it looks pretty subtle. On the left there, it's really crowded and there's a lot of thin branches. This is probably the first year you did it. You see, we didn't top it off. We didn't remove anything from the top. We just thinned it out. You can see the building's much better. And a lot of times you don't really notice it that much, but you can, when you put it side by side, you can see that you've taken quite a bit out. And I think some of the cuttings are left at the base, so you can really see how much they took out. And by doing that, you know, if you've ever had crepe myrtles or seen them around town, you see how beautiful they are. The flowers are beautiful in themselves, but they're so beautiful in their bark. And they produce really good shade for a parking lot. They're very hardy in that situation. They have winter interest. But anyway, the real interest, the cinnamon bark is really common in the Natchez. And there's other shades of different things, especially as the bark starts falling off. It's fun to watch the tree mature like that. And it's like opening a present in the year when they start shedding that bark and opening up this smooth bark. A little bit more brown and white right there. Here's some of the ones that have come out. I don't know, I don't think we might be trialing some at the gardens, but a lot of these things are being crossed and bred in places like Texas A&M, maybe Georgia. I don't know where all these come from, but here's one that has a dark foliage, but a bubblegum pink blooms, which I was telling someone the other day in preparation for this talk. It's crazy because maybe this is going to be in style. It's like buying a orange shirt and then next year it's not in style anymore. It's the wrong color or wrong shade of orange for a UT fan. But and so that's one of the downfalls. There's just so many different choices out there. But this one has the dark leaves and then the pink blooms really pop out. That's been a pretty common one. I'm not sure if I like those real dark, almost black leaves, but they do pop things out. Here's another one with that purple maroon foliage and a little nicer shade, I think, of the color. Here's a nice white. I think white would really pop out in so many places, more of a cottony white bloom. And then the reds. I think the reds have been kind of the fad for the last few years. I don't have the dynamic red. I've got more of the purple types of the lower growing ones. This one only gets 12 feet, 6 feet wide. Very, very beautiful. Here's a deep upright dwarf variety, Tonto. Here's some they even put near the pool. Looks like they're in pots. So you can go that route. You can go hanging baskets. One called Bourbon Street hanging basket. I haven't looked at that one yet. I don't even know if there's anybody in town that would grow that, but I would check out the barn or Udwin Nursery or some of those bigger ones and ask them for it. They might have that. There's a festival, I'm not sure where that's from, where they just did a weeping variety. That's very stunning. Then it could even be used for bonsai. Get a little flowering bonsai plant out of it. And that's probably Natchez, and you can see the gentleman at the bottom there and how big they can get. So you got to have an area. If you're going to go with those bigger ones, you got to have an area that's going to have capacity for that. Now, I've heard a lot of native people say that crepe myrtles aren't native, and because they're not native, they're kind of like statues in the garden. So I kind of researched that a little bit, and I came up with this next few slides that kind of dispute that a little bit. First of all, this is Dr. Bob Berhaig at Penn State, who does research on flowers. I think he was at Michigan State when I was there. And he also is involved in the Center for Pollinator Research. He said that it makes most sense to pick plants best suited for each site, which crepe myrtle is very best suited for a lot of our hot summers and some of our heavy soils where a lot of the natives would not grow or couldn't grow. And simply because a plant was in Tennessee before Columbus arrived doesn't make it better or worse than one that wasn't. Sometimes people use Columbus as sort of a marking point for natives versus non-natives. And similar studies have found that diversity, having different plants, not just all crepe myrtles, but all kinds of natives, and is far more important than native versus non-native status. So maybe we can have a meeting of the minds. This is really interesting here. Crepe myrtles get a lot of little creatures called aphids. See all those little aphids? They're not always that bad, but usually midsummer you'll see a lot of these little creatures on the leaves, and those little creatures suck juices out of the crepe myrtle. They don't seem to really harm them unless they get to be this many, but then they exude. They suck out the pure juices out of the leaf. They excrete them in sort of a clear liquid called honeydew, and then there's a fungus in the air that colonizes it, and sometimes it can make the leaves look pretty drab and black, really. But in the meantime, all that honeydew is being absorbed or used by wasps, paper wasps, different ants, parasitoids that are very good for our garden. So the study indicates that Hymenoptera, which are the bees, have increased longevity in foraging when they produce with a source like honeydew. Some of the other beneficials that are encouraged by crepe myrtle are ladybird beetles, green lacewings, flower fly larvae, and generalist predators that go in and attack these aphids. And then they turn around and go into your flower garden and attack other aphids that are in your garden. So it's a very good biological control. Pollinator benefit, a good strategy for attracting pollinators is to plant small groups of crepe myrtles. University of Florida researchers are currently investigating the idea that using these blocks of crepe myrtles, even in pecan orchards, have shown really a promise. And they made the statement that crepe myrtle is probably the most important woody landscape plant in the southeastern U.S. for augmenting and sustaining many beneficial insects. During excessive drought periods, which we get quite often in the late summer, those aphids may be the only food available for many beneficial insects. And that was research done at the University of Florida on their integrated pest management. Those aphids and their sugary honeydew are food for 20 to 30 species of beneficial insect predators. These are bugs, good bugs that feed on the bad bugs, and lots of bees and wasps. They also attract and provide nectar and pollen to many of our pollinating bees. These crepe myrtles and their aphids attract beneficial parasites and plants in the surrounding area. So those aphids are somewhat of a detriment to the crepe myrtles if they build up too high, but they could be very beneficial to our other plants. So it's a balance. And some research on what kind of birds are attracted to crepe myrtles. Goldfinches accounted for 49% of the birds in one study that observed taking the seeds and cracking them open. Dark-eyed juncos, I don't know if we have that bird here, but yeah, house finches, northern cardinals. We've got sparrows that are used for those seeds, and then the seeds that fall to the ground are used for other cardinals and different things. So a large crepe myrtle tree, 20 feet tall, can produce pounds of seed, a few pounds each year, and each kilogram or 2.3 pounds has 570,000 individual seeds. So there's a lot of seeds that are going through in a crepe myrtle. Here's an interesting problem that we're really bracing for. I've only had one report of this crepe myrtle bark scale, and you can see it on the left there. You can see all those are in that little inset picture. That's the scale. And what it does is just populates so fast that it covers the bark, and it's not known to kill the tree, but it can really make it less prone to flowering, just make it sickly looking. And how to cure it. One of the cures is to make sure the tree has open, more sunlight. The other one is to use chemicals, which we want to get away from that. Another one is to let it go, basically. And what they're seeing are ladybugs. This one called the twice-stabbed ladybug. And I know we've got it in our area because when we were doing research or looking for hemlock woolly adelgid, one of the researchers found this twice-stabbed. You see it has two little red dots on its backs. And all those little other spiny creatures are the larvae of that twice-stabbed ladybug. So you can see that they're going to go after the scale pretty heavily. So there's some biological control that could go on there too, and plus that, those ladybugs will go to your own flowers. So that's a good thing. Hopefully, you can see how the crepe myrtle scale is scattered around Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana. Memphis has had it for 5 or so years. There's reports in Memphis that really have devastated some of their crepe myrtles. And like I said, we haven't really seen it full blast here. I don't know, once we get some reports, we may be in for a struggle against this problem. So I want to thank you for this seminar today.